Some are destined to shine, even in death. One of the most fascinating stories in the history of Appalachia, and it's nearly been lost to the hands of time until now. This is the true story of the Sunshine Lady. Our story begins in the mountains of Hendersonville, North Carolina, in 1861, when a beautiful baby girl named Layla Davison was born into this world. Her bloodlines were the same as the stalwart Scotch-Irish pioneers who had sailed across the ocean and landed in America 150 years earlier. And during that time, her family had built up an empire of wealth and influence throughout North Carolina. That's right, the name Davison signaled political power and prestige. It was Layla's grandfather who had donated nearly 700 acres of land for the famous Davison Presbyterian College, and many of her family members' names were etched in stone throughout its campus. Layla arrived in the world during a time of great upheaval. The rumblings of the war between the states had reached even the secluded mountains of North Carolina. But within the walls of the Davison home, life moved in harmony with the seasons, immune from the war that was tearing the nation apart. Layla and her 8 siblings were raised in an atmosphere of privilege and purpose, where faith in God and service to others were paramount. Her father was a prominent doctor who could afford to provide the finest education for each of them. And while most girls during this time in history bypassed education altogether and instead focused on dressmaking and practical skills needed to run a rural family farm, Layla attended an elite all-girls charm school where she learned to speak French and German and read the poetry of the Romantics and performed the music of Beethoven on piano and violin, and excelled in the art of conversation, public speaking, posture, walking, and stage presence. All of the essential qualities of an inspiring young lady who would one day become an accomplished wife and socialite of a wealthy man. From early on, it became apparent that there was something special about Layla. She possessed an unusual beauty with long, flowing, auburn locks of hair, creamy skin, and kind, innocent eyes that would literally make men and women alike take notice. Yet, physical beauty is only on the surface. But for Layla, there was something else deep inside of her that radiated to all who knew her. Her sisters adored her, and her brothers competed for her attention, and she was her father's pride. It wasn't just her beauty that drew people to her. It was the compassion that seemed to emanate from her, like a warm fire on a cold winter night. The mountain girl was highly intelligent and articulate. Her tutors marveled at her quick mind and curiosity. She devoured the books in her father's library, from the Bible to the poems of Longfellow. So it was, Layla grew into a young woman whose beauty, intelligence, and generosity were unmatched. The mountains of Henderson County were her home, and the backdrop to a life that seemed destined for greatness. By every measure, she seemed perfect to outsiders. She had it all. But as we all know, life's journey isn't a smooth path. Instead, the way forward is full of mountains to climb and unexpected trials that can rip at the very fabric of our soul. For now, though, Layla remained a child of light, her radiance shining undimmed against the backdrop of the Appalachian Mountains.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling today. 2 volumes that'll make your heart smile. Click the link below or visit the appalachianstoryteller.com to order your copies today.
By the summer of 1883, Layla Davison was 22 years old and was a very successful school teacher, teaching in both public and private schools. Now, she was a favorite of the students because of her energetic, spontaneous style. She had a vivid imagination that seemed to bring the words written on the pages to life. Many times, she held her classes outside on warm, sunny days, with her students seated in a circle around her, hanging on to every word she masterfully spun into some forgotten story from long ago. She told stories of history that weren't taught anywhere else, parables of faith, and tales with valuable life lessons. She had a way of making her listeners feel like they personally knew the characters in each story. It was as if they were transported to another place and time, and they too were in Layla's stories, riding shotgun with heroes or some outlaw, or experiencing some forgotten historical event firsthand through the eyes of the characters as they experienced it themselves. To her students, Layla was more than a teacher. No, she was a master storyteller. Now, Hendersonville, like many places in Appalachia during the 1880s, were sought after as summer vacation spots from the wealthy from all around the world. You see, long before the miracle drug of penicillin, folks believed in the healing powers of clean air and pure mountain water. In Appalachia, well, it was full of both. The millions of trees that blanketed the mountains created a rainforest effect that cleansed the air, and mineral springs were abundant everywhere. So much so that hotels sprang up near these springs and advertised the medical healing powers throughout the world, and newspapers and magazines. The rich and affluent, along with the sick and ailing, flocked to places like Hendersonville on board the interstate of the day, the railroad, hoping that the water and the air would cure everything from heart and liver problems to tuberculosis. With that in mind, there was no shortage of young eligible bachelors who soon took notice of the beautiful school teacher and socialite, Layla Davison. Many of them, they did everything they could to earn her heart and her hand in marriage, but none had succeeded. It was during the summer of 1883 when a man named Charles Hansel visited the area. Now, Charles was a well-known senator and judge from Georgia who had devoted his life to politics, and he too came to Henderson seeking the pure mountain air and its healing waters. Yet, during a dinner at the hotel he was staying in, he was entranced by a woman who was playing a Beethoven sonata at the grand piano. Her hands floated effortlessly and with delicate purpose above the ivory keys. Each note she played seemed to capture the emotion and fiery passion of the composer who had written it. And Charles had never seen a lady so beautiful, so radiant, with such grace and talent. Charles, like so many would-be suitors before him, was spellbound by Layla. And that night, he summoned the courage to introduce himself to her, and a friendship was born. The entire summer, the two grew closer and closer and became inseparable, spending most afternoons together, watching the sunset behind the ridges that walled in this slice of heaven. Charles was not only handsome and well-spoken, but he also shared her passion with helping others. He would sit with her as she read to the children, offering his booming baritone for the parts of the stories that called for a hero's voice. Now, the children adored him, and soon, so did Layla. And the following spring, they were married. Because of his political obligations, the couple moved to Atlanta and started their new life together. Now a married woman, Layla thrived in her new home. She volunteered at local schools, teaching reading and writing to children from underprivileged neighborhoods. She had a way of seeing the best in people, no matter their station in life, and what a charmed life it was. The years flew by, full of the happiest of memories and love, and by 1915, the couple had been happily married for nearly 30 years and were still in the prime of their lives. But sadly, Layla's health began to falter. At first, there weren't many signs, just an occasional fever or a fatigue that lingered even after a full night's rest. But finally, a doctor's visit was ordered, and the diagnosis was one they both had feared: tuberculosis. Consumption, as it was called back then. Oh, it was a deadly disease that knew no boundaries. It struck rich and poor alike, its slow, relentless grip claiming thousands every year. And soon, Layla's beauty and vitality began to wane as the illness took hold of her. And Charles, he was determined to fight it, and he spared no expense, seeking out the best doctors and treatments. But nothing worked. It seemed Layla's only hope was to return to the mountains of North Carolina, where she had been born and raised. Perhaps there, she would be healed by the air and the mineral waters, just like so many others had been. So Charles took his bride back to Hendersonville, and again, he got Layla the finest treatment available. Yet, her health continued to deteriorate. It was then that the dreams began. Night after night, Layla woke in a cold sweat, her hands clutching at the sheets. In each of her dreams, she was trapped in a coffin, surrounded by the suffocating darkness. She was completely paralyzed with fear. During each dream, she would fight to force herself to wake up, but she was unable to move at all as the darkness of the cold grave consumed her. Each night, the dreams continued. It was so dark, she couldn't see anything, and it seemed that the coffin was shrinking, closing in on her until the lid was pressed on her face, suffocating her. Even during the daytime, it haunted her to the point where it was all she could think about, and she would stay awake for days trying to escape the nightmares.
Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller, and we're here in Hendersonville, North Carolina, at the site of the grave of Layla Davison Hansel, as we continue with the incredible true story of the Sunshine Lady.
Yet, Layla knew the end was near, and so she told Charles that she had one last request when she died. She wanted to be buried above ground, and she made Charles promise her to build a tomb that would forever allow the sunlight to shine on her. And Charles promised he would, and he hired a team of craftsmen to build a tomb according to his wife's wishes. It was completed in December of 1915, and just 3 weeks later, Layla died. The morning of her funeral was cold and clear, and the small community gathered in droves. Their carriages were lining the dirt road that led down to the Oakdale Cemetery. Everyone who came had a story to share about Layla, a memory of her laughter, a lesson that she taught, a kindness that she bestowed on them. And though grief hung heavy in the air, so did a quiet reverence for the woman who had touched so many lives. The tomb had been carefully constructed to honor Layla's wishes. There was no stone which bore her name. Instead, there was a structure made of rows of prism-like glass blocks, which formed the walls and the roof, refracting the sunlight into a rainbow of colors that danced within. The top of Layla's casket was left off, and her body was covered with a thin veil that would allow the sunlight to shower her body. But at the same time, the interior was invisible from the outside due to the veil. Layla would never be in darkness, just like she wanted. A unique end to a beautiful life. Or was it? Not so fast, you see. It's what happens in Layla's death that forever changed the history in that small town of Hendersonville, North Carolina, and soon became a spectacle that captured the entire nation's attention. So it was, for the next 3 years, the glass grave in Oakdale Cemetery remained a little-known curiosity in the small mountain hamlet. And after a while, it just became another one of those stories that the old-timers would simply say, "Oh, we don't talk about that no more." But during the 1920s, a small crack in the mortar between the glass squares on the top of the tomb developed and began to allow moisture inside. But it went completely unnoticed by everyone. That is until one day in 1927, a young boy was walking through the graveyard, reading the dates on the old tombstones, when he happened upon Layla's grave. Such an odd structure, the young boy thought to himself. And in that moment, his curiosity got the best of him, and he summoned the courage to press his face against the glass and have a look inside. But the glass proved to be too cloudy, and he couldn't see anything. So he took a cup of water and poured it over one of the glass tiles and used the sleeve of his shirt to rub it clean. And then he slowly pressed his face against the glass again. And in that moment, there was a skeleton with flowing auburn hair looking back at him through the glass. The old-timers say that boy ran so fast out of the graveyard that you could have played a game of checkers on his shirt tail as it was stretched out straight, blowing in the wind. And before the sun rose that very next day, wagging tongues had spread the news all over Western Carolina about the Sunshine Lady. Ever the opportunist, school children took shifts at the cemetery gates, selling cups of water to the hordes of curious onlookers who made the pilgrimage to see it with their own eyes. And within weeks, newspapers all across America began writing stories about the Sunshine Lady, resulting in tens of thousands of people flocking to see her grave. The city of Hendersonville was so aggravated by the unwanted attention, they covered the glass grave with tar. But it was no use, since the tourists scraped all the tar off and the spectacle continued well into the 1930s. Most folks today have never heard the story of Layla Davison Hansel or her glass grave. That's because in the 1930s, against Layla's final wish, the city of Hendersonville covered her entire tomb with a thick layer of concrete. And today is just an anonymous, unmarked grave that no one gives a second thought about. The irony is that today, the Sunshine Lady is forever enclosed in darkness. And in the words of a hero of mine, now you know the rest of the story. What about you, my friend? What do you think about the idea of being buried in a glass grave? Was the city right to cover it with concrete? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.